turning Mel Gibson into a household name from Australia to the United States, turning it into an epic trilogy, which became a quadrilogy or a tetralogy. This is the story of the road warrior, Mad Max. Having just finished Mad Max Fury Road, the fourth film, I was shocked at how good it was, but I wanted to do a quick overview of the entire quadrilogy. But that original trilogy, there's so many themes that we kind of overlook, and all the cool stuff of the violence and the brutality, the post-apocalyptic wasteland. I mean, it created a pro wrestling tag team that was also famous. It generated 1 million movies that were like it. It became the franchise that defined what that post-apocalyptic horror would look like. But really, in the first Mad Max film, we saw he was still working as a police officer. There was the Anarchy Road. He had a family and a home, though. There was some semblance that civilization wasn't completely gone. Whatever crisis, and we got different little tidbits about it through the films, but the crisis that brought civilization down would have affected different places, obviously with different rapidity. If you're at ground zero or you're further out, Australia, it was not necessarily the epicenter, but what we see in the first film, there's some semblance of law and order. The guy in charge of the police force keeps telling Mel Gibson's character, he keeps telling Max, we need a hero, you need to be a hero. Looking to get something, a heroic, legendary figure, to have people think of law enforcement in this way again, to try to rebuild out of this darkness, or to stop the downturn, really. In the second film, The Road Warrior, he is definitely just sort of wandering the waste. In order to avenge his loved ones, he had gone off the books, off the law, and gotten brutal vigilante justice against the biker gang in the first film. And now he's just sort of a loner. He has kind of given up the law. He has left civilization. And he seems to be, at first you figure he's wandering a place more devastated, or some time has gone by and everything has kind of gotten worse. By the time we get to Beyond Thunderdome, the third film, we see a real clear paradigm being presented of civilization trying to rebuild and what that looks like. And we actually get a couple versions of it. Tina Turner being Auntie Entity, who's in charge of Bartertown. Yeah, it's a sleazeball place, but it is run off the energy from pig manure. There's a real effort to get back to civilization. And in that film, more than any, they really talk about, in their lingo, the time of the knowing and the doing of things. There's an awareness that civilization collapsed. We're not sure how long ago now, because even the language is different, and it's taken on a mythological status, almost Atlantean. In the past, we had the knowing and doing of things. But Bartertown is trying to get back to that, but it is, as everything else humans build, it's affected by the degeneracy of humans and their moral and ethical failures, their original sin, if you will. So Bartertown, at least, is an effort to rebuild some semblance of something. But in the course of that film, we also meet the children, survivors of the plane crash, or the failed attempt to move some amount of the population out of harm's way that led to this strange, almost post-World War II Islander cargo cult where they worship the remains of the plane and are waiting for the return of the epic mythological hero, Captain Walker. But they're living a very primitive, tribal sort of existence in a place where they were able to get the resources to be able to do that. And so you really have this fork in the road, right? Is human civilization going to be like Bartertown? Are we going to try using pig manure to create energy to try to keep doing at least some of the things our atomic age ancestors were able to do? Are we going to keep holding on to that? And will it work? And will we be able to reverse it? Or do we just let it go, start where there's food and resources, start with rebuilding society, go from there, from very primitive technology, get healthy, get fed, and stop all of this depravity of what's going on in Bartertown with the using and abusing of people? Which way will we go? Now, at the end of that third film, when we last see Mel Gibson in the role, he's sort of the cowboy western, which is what he's always been. He was the lawman who had to leave the law, who wanders the wastes of the West fighting bad guys, torn between his own immediate necessities and that little voice inside him that still says, do the right thing. So his riding off into the sunset at the end of Beyond Thunderdome, while the kids have moved to the city and there's this sort of optimistic idea that maybe civilization will return. They kind of leave it there, and I thought that it was the perfect ending to the trilogy. And so when all those years go by and you hear there's another movie, you hear that Charlize Theron is in it, she's excellent. If you haven't seen the movie Monster, she's got to be, of actresses, the best actress, just pure talent of her generation, to be able to do what she did in Monster. That's almost like Johnny Depp, Gary Oldman level of becoming a completely other person. Literally it is. That is what she does. It is really at that level, I should say. It's that interesting. She does an excellent job as Furiosa in Mad Max Fury Road. But when I heard that was coming up after all this time and the way it wrapped up before, did we really need another one? Did we really need, and that was 2015. Since then, of course, Hollywood has been digging up the zombified corpses of everything that it can to ruin it, destroy it, make it modern, and all this insert Marxist stuff. And having a woman in this lead role, I immediately, my little radar went up even in 2015. Like, are we rebooting this in a feminist way? Is this what we're after? And I know some people, that was their take on it and didn't like it. I saw some of the reviews before I watched it. But I really didn't get that from it at all. Yeah, she's a strong female character, but I think it's necessary for, if you've got this trilogy that wraps up so nicely along this theme of a dying civilization trying to reemerge, where could you possibly take it from there if you're going to do a fourth one at all? Where do you extend out that perfect ending of the third? And they do it so well. And probably because you have the original people involved with the actual production who'd had it in mind, they say, and been working for a long time. But it fits excellent because you get the character, you get the character of Immortan, you get the War Boys, not real clear what sort of radiation or whatever sort of post-disaster sickness they're suffering from. But the Citadel, again, like Bartertown, but more advanced. It's further down the road. And he has built this thing around the Citadel that most resembles civilization. But like Thunderdome, like Bartertown before it is twisted by human ambition. I mean, if this civilization around the Citadel were to go on for 1,000 years, in the future history of the new planet, he'd have been like some Babylonian king of epic myth, right? The legendary Immortan. Because he's building this thing, but he's doing it ruthlessly, brutally, the things that our early ancestors had to do to get out of the darkness and into a forced civilized existence for everyone's benefit. But that's a whole long story. Immortan has this whole, but what's unique, we see that he's trying. He knows what he needs to do. He's not a dumb person. He knows that producing healthy offspring that aren't affected by the sickness of the poisoning of the disaster is the future. Whoever is able to do that, their descendants are the ones that are going to survive. That's how you rebuild, repopulate an entire civilization. And even though he's got access to water, using mother's milk as a food source. I mean, this was brilliant writing, brilliant thinking, and it gives a brilliant idea to the character in the movie. The way he's producing all of these children, and just like in a herd of cattle, I grew up on a dairy farm. After the cow gives birth, you get the mother's milk to the baby for a little while, then the calf gets on replacer, and then you take the milk and put it in the bulk tank, and that's what ends up being consumed by humans. In a shortage of livestock, whereas Bartertown was run on pig manure, he's using humans as the livestock, but our natural cycle and the need to produce healthy babies, hey, whatever the morals of it are, in the crisis situation, he's got all these women that are healthy, able to have healthy babies, popping out babies, and in between, he's literally milking them and feeding the population this natural, brilliant food source in this wasteland. All of this follows neatly after the trilogy. Like, this is something someone might very well do if they're really smart and really get the resources together to try to build a civilization like this. But it brings back to the theme now is motherhood, right? Because you've had this splinter where a Morton civilization is heavily masculine, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But with the war boys and the violence, and what it really seems to be lacking is what we say a woman's touch. And so we get the character of Furiosa, and we get the characters of the women who were in the obscure motherhood cult, which is never in detail described with any accuracy that we could say we know what it was. They lived in a green patch, which is now gone. There's only a few women left. But those pure brides that were owned by a Morton and wanted to escape, being able to fuse that feminine cult of reproduction and fertility to this culture that is venerating the need to produce healthy babies, but doing it in a merciless way. So that even by the end, when you leave, and clearly, well, I don't want to spoil too much, but what clearly you get is the fusion of these ideas. And like the first movie, the second movie, the third movie, this fourth movie really shows the growth back towards a human civilization. But out of the age of brutality, through all of the wandering and fighting in the wasteland over slim resources in lawlessness, the efforts of, at the end of all that violence and brutality, you've got to get around to something that is more genuinely civilized, or it's not going to work. And that's really what Fury Road kind of points to. You could conceivably continue this on. I don't know that they will. It didn't do well at the box office, although there's some buzz about making a Furiosa film. But I think that's a mistake. The best deal would be, well, depending on how they do it, the best deal now would be to keep moving it to the future. And even if you moved it beyond the lifetime of Max, show what a future human civilization that has only vague mytho-historical memories of what had happened in the time before time, rebuilding in this way that they remember this epic hero. And it really is, Mad Max takes on, finally in the fourth film, you really get the idea. He is a messianic figure, whereas he was the wandering cowboy, former lawman, broken man suffering. In the fourth film, he's this guy having arrived from a time when he was still a police officer and has knowledge of this sort of civilized behavior of law and order, arrives on the scene, and what do they do with him, right? Immediately, the decadent culture, they abduct him to take him for his blood, and he's type O, and they use him as a blood bag. Literally, there's messianic blood as a theme in this film, being stolen by the aggressor, but then being offered willingly in order to save the day by the end. It really is incredible stuff. And the movie within the fourth film, the way that it works internally, the great story of one of the war boys who joins up with the other side, and the whole weird cult of going to Valhalla and how it plays out. And by the time it's an emotional moment. By the time you see what he does to sacrifice himself, it really was well done and amazingly fit. The only complaint I would remotely have about the fourth film is that because of the changes in production value, technology, special effects, even though everything they design clearly fits in the Road Warrior Mad Max universe, clearly is a progression of, like, you can see that technology is getting better, that times are changing, that it's getting more developed under a Morton, replacing the old military drummer and marching band with the heavy metal guitarist on the moving platform. I mean, this is incredibly well done, but it all looks so good. The fight scenes look so good, and these long drag race on the road fight scenes go on so long that it feels more like a Marvel superhero movie, because the technology makes it's so good in those aspects that it doesn't fit. If you do what I did, and over like a 4-day period, I watched all 4 movies, everything about the story works, but it's so visually different from the old ones that it's hard to feel like in those scenes like it's really Mad Max. But it does the job, and is really a fabulous movie.